Hi, I'm Steph Whitaker from PCT TV. I'm now joined by Patricia Leuchten, who is President and CEO at the Avoca Group. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's a
So
pleasure to be here.
firstly, could you please tell me a bit about the Avoca Group and what you guys do?
Sure. Well, at Avoca, our work is really focused on helping companies to improve quality and drive efficiency in the clinical trial execution process. And we really have three main things that we do at the company. We have a research and consulting business, which I started almost 20 years ago now. It's hard to believe.
Long time.
We also have a consortium, which is a collaborative of pharma, biotech, and service providers, and that's really focused on proactive quality and risk management.
Yeah.
And we have a new area that we've launched this year called Diligent. And Diligent is a platform for centralizing pre-qualification activities. And the idea there is to just cut through some of the dysfunction in the pre-qualification process, again, to drive efficiency, increase quality, and mitigate risk.
Okay, perfect. And one of the big things we're talking about at the minute is the ICH E6R2.
Yeah.
How do you think is the best way for people to interpret that?
Well, it was really interesting to me when the guidelines were released earlier in the year. We saw that a lot of companies really started to try to mobilize to address what's in the guidelines. And essentially the guidelines are all about implementing risk-based approaches to clinical trial execution. That's an issue because I feel that as an industry, we're just not very good at risk management and risk mitigation. We, yesterday I presented here at PCT and we presented some of our research from earlier in the year. We did a very comprehensive assessment on how the industry assesses and manages risk. And the punchline of that data really is that there are significant gaps. There are learning gaps, there are silos, and a lot of the challenges that we're experiencing in the industry are really sort of prohibiting us from doing our best in terms of implementing these risk-based approaches. So I think that in terms of interpreting the guidelines, you know, the guidelines are specific, but they're not prescriptive, and I think that creates a challenge within some companies.
Yeah.
The easy part, in my mind, is the creating processes, getting SOPs aligned, ensuring that there's a strength of documentation. We actually provide a lot of that material through the consortium. The hard part is getting individuals to change their behaviors and mindset as it pertains to executing trials through the lens of risk.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably what companies are struggling with the most.
Because they've always done it a certain way.
You know, I think largely, and I'm generalizing here because there's certainly people in the industry who are very good at this. There are companies that are very good at this, but our research has shown, and companies have self-assessed, that that there just are gaps, and I think it's because we have been very reactive in a way as an industry, and now the guidelines are advocating for more proactive, thoughtful approaches.
Yeah.
And it is hard to kind of make that shift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you find in your session yesterday that there were a lot of questions that people had?
The session was so good, and it was great in that we set it up so that it was completely interactive, and I showed this kind of provocative data. We had a very large sample, and the data showed that both on the sponsor side and on the provider side, our respondents were basically self-assessing that they're just not that good at some of these areas that are really important and that are stipulated in the guidelines. So we asked the audience, well, what's your experience? And we asked the panel, and you know, I as the chair asked the audience for a show of hands of anybody who felt that their organization is actually doing a pretty good job. Not great, but a pretty good job.
On the right line.
There were no hands that went up, and so you know, I love presenting the data because and having conversations in forums like this because it provides us with sort of an opportunity to really hear what's happening and to get a reaction to see, okay, we gathered this quantitative and qualitative data, but is that your experience? And so it was really enjoyable to have that conversation with the audience, and they concurred, and there were a lot of questions that were asked, and a lot of comments really about the fact that we don't have standard definitions for some of these things. There's sometimes a overinterpretation of guidelines, or there's enough gray area that sometimes people feel a little paralyzed to move forward.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a common challenge here that does need to be addressed.
Yeah. It must have been quite comforting for the other companies to look around and see that no one else had their hand up either.
I think so, and that's
We're all
what,
in the same
yes,
place.
I think that's what people kind of like about our research. Now with our consortium, we have such a kind of a captive audience, and a large group of companies to tap into, and it's a pure sample, right? So when people see, okay, it's not just me, it's not just our organization that has challenges, this is an industry challenge. And I think then what we want to do is use that to mobilize change, to have the data serve as a catalyst almost for greater awareness, but then quickly move to solutions. And that's really what we've been working on with the consortium. The consortium started really with research on how the industry is managing quality, and the data was provocative, it was dramatic. I actually presented it for the first time at PCT. It got a lot of attention.
Yeah.
We were able to present that data at the FDA. We had a senior executives on our panel, and I think collectively we decided, look, we're not just going to present what the issues are. Now we want to move to real solutions, practical solutions to help companies address these challenges as a collaborative, rather than everybody sort of struggling on their own in their own
breaking
silos.
down those silos.
Yes, yeah.
Perfect. So you've touched on some of the things that you think would be the biggest challenges to the successful implementation, but what do you think is the single most?
You know what I think would have a very big impact? It's getting the senior leaders, senior executives' heads around this. What we hear from some of our consortium members is that sometimes there is a disconnect between the individuals who are really on the front lines of clinical trial execution and the most senior people, which is
within the same company,
which is understandable, right? But I think if we could get senior executives to first really understand the challenge and that this is an industry imperative now, and then to support real change, organizational change, which requires training. It requires individuals to, close some of these learning gaps. It requires maybe a different way of thinking. I think that if the senior executives embrace this change and understand what the impact is, we could hit kind of a faster, we could get to a tipping point.
Cascaded down and up, basically.
Yes, and I actually didn't realize that was as big of an issue until we started to get into a conversation about it within our own consortium at one of our working sessions, where we had functional leads saying, look, we just don't have the support within our own organization to to make sweeping change in this area. So
okay, and if we step away from these guidelines and these regulations, and we say you had the power to change one thing in the whole clinical trials landscape, what do you think you'd change?
Well,
big question.
I have a real passion for collaboration, and it was part of the reason we started the consortium. I feel like there is just so much collective brain power in this industry. I've been in the industry for 30 years. I've met incredible people, and I've witnessed when you get a group of individuals and companies together that have disparate and varied experiences, magic can happen. And there's just so many silos, and now the clinical trial ecosystem is so complex, and it's getting more and more complex. So I feel that driving the collaboration models to even further could actually have a huge, huge impact.
Perfect. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Steph.